SoundCloud. So welcome everyone to another talk in the Baha'i Summer School of 2021. The theme of this year is Abdu'l-Baha, his life, his service, and his lasting legacy. We try to respond to the call from the house to really highlight the wonderful and invaluable service of Abdu'l-Baha to this world. And I hope that you enjoy learning more about his teachings during the Baha'i School 2021. So we're having a lot of talks. So this is the 5th talk in the summer school. So we have a total of 12, and we have 9 speakers divided between Portuguese talks and English talks. To watch the, sorry, I got distracted by when people joining here. To watch them, you have to register in the website, so bahaischoolportugal.au. I hope that that's how you got here today. That help us to keep a little bit more management in the summer school, seeing everybody that's going to join us in the day. So register for each talk individually. And I'm just gonna tell you about the service opportunity that we have today. Fortunately, we don't need a translation because everybody seems to speak English. But if you can translate English to Portuguese, please reach out to me and the summer school, the scholars at baha'i.pt, and tell us that you can help us translate in the sessions. And oops, sorry, I came back. So our next talk, it's gonna be, and this is gonna, I'll talk in Portuguese because this is a Portuguese talk. Nossa próxima palestra é O Meu Lar é o Lar do Riso e do Júbilo, Abdu'l-Bahá e o Humor, com o Varká, no dia 27 de junho, às 11 da manhã. É um horário um pouco diferente do que nós estamos a ter hoje, porque o Varká vive em Portugal, então nós vamos ter um horário mais específico para a comunidade portuguesa. And following that talk, we have a talk in English, which is Abdu'l-Bahá, the Center of the Covenant, with John Hatcher. It's the first part of 3 talks that he's going to give, and I hope to see you all there. And today's talk is reframing our concept of power and fit leadership, lessons from Abdu'l-Baha, with our wonderful speaker, Sovaida Maani Ewing. And our small agenda for today, we're going to have, I'm not sure if you're joining us for the first time today, but we're going to divide in smaller groups so we can talk to each other, just get the feeling of a live event that we cannot have this year. I'm going to just divide you guys in breakout rooms and you can talk to each other. And then we're going to have a prayer for about 3 minutes. And Sovaida is going to present for about 50 minutes. And she's also going to answer some questions for about 15 minutes. And I hope you guys are excited for this talk. Thank you, Sovaida.
Thank you all for your patience. Wow, the joys of modern technology. Well, the good news is that we get to all see each other and bring people from all parts of the world together who may not otherwise have been able to participate, but we also contend with the challenges. Okay, let's dive into this. The topic of today's conversation is reframing our conception of power and fit leadership, lessons gleaned from Abdu'l-Baha. You know, when we look at, so I'll lift my finger, Fernando, for you to change the slides. So I'll do this, if that's okay. When we look at our world today, we notice a couple of things straight off the bat. The first is that our world is beset by crises that are multiplying in number and kind. We see some really obvious ones like the pandemic, like climate change, like the economic recession, and all the incidences of social injustice. Many of these have become existential threats that actually threaten our survival as a human race. We also notice that they're increasing in frequency. They're increasing in intensity. Think of climate change, the wildfires. Every year, the wildfires get more intense and we have more of them, and they're increasing in frequency. Same with the droughts and the floods and the strong winds, the hurricanes, and so on. So we come to the conclusion that these are just like birth pangs, right? This is what happens when a woman in labor has contractions. And sure enough, Baha'u'llah tells us that the whole earth is now in a state of pregnancy, and the day is approaching when it will have yielded its noblest fruit. So we have to be optimistic because something good is going to come out of all this. The second thing we notice is that our systems are failing, and failing quite spectacularly. Right when we need them the most, our systems, our societal systems, our political, economic, religious, environmental systems are all starting to fail us. In fact, they're unraveling with a bewildering rapidity. According to the Universal House of Justice in its letter of January 2019, they acknowledge that the forces of disintegration regroup and gain ground. And they say, so be it. Why do they say it? Because they follow immediately by saying the unification of humanity is unstoppable by any human force. In other words, everything we see now, these trends are purely temporary. So what we learn from all of this is that all our old behaviors no longer serve us. They're just not working. Shoghi Effendi says when that happens, when old laws, systems, policies, ways of doing things cease to serve us, we need to dispense with them. And he says, relegate them to the limbo of obsolescent doctrines. Another way to think about what he says is that at any point in our existence, we can make different choices. We are not doomed to repeat our past. And who we are now as a human race is only a snapshot in time and does not determine who we could be in the future. But if we sweep something away, we can't leave a vacuum. We have to replace old habits with new ones. And the question becomes what? And the second question becomes, how do we find the motivation in order to do this sweeping away? Now, when we want to make changes to the way we do things, experts in behavioral change tell us that the way to change behaviors and habits must begin with a shift in mindset, shift with the way we think. Why? Because there's a cycle that happens with human beings. Our mindsets trigger our emotions, which dictate our behaviors. Those behaviors become habits, which over time, when adopted by enough people in a geographical area, become culture. And that culture becomes our reality. So if we want to change our reality, we have to start with the root, which is mindset.
Sovaida Jun, Marjan asked me for you to speak a little bit slower so she can translate it, okay?
Thank you for the reminder. So what are mindsets and where do they come from? Mindsets are the lenses through which if you could go back a slide, please. Okay. Mindsets are lenses through which we understand and interpret our reality. They are shaped, they basically consist of our thoughts, our attitudes, our perspectives, and the stories we tell ourselves. They're shaped by our past experiences, by our family and societal cultures, by our values, and a sense of who we are. Mindsets cause us to develop limiting beliefs, rules about how reality functions or should function, interpretations and stories we repeat about who we are and what's happening and what does it all mean. They actually function like the operating system in a computer. You know, the operating system is hidden from view when you're using your computer, like trying to figure out the PowerPoint today, right? We don't see all the codes in there, but it drives the behavior of the computers. And so they dictate, these mindsets dictate the range of choices we see at any given moment. The choices are sometimes expanded and sometimes restricted depending on how we think about things. And they create blind spots in us. The good news is that even the smallest shift in mindset can have a huge impact on our reality. A really good example to understand this is an airplane. You know, the pilot at the beginning of his journey sets charts the course for how the airplane flies, and even 1 to 2 changes in degree in the flight plan will alter the destination radically and could make the difference between landing in the ocean or landing on firm ground. Now, the role of divine revelation, one of the key roles and one of the key gifts that all divine revelation brings us is a gift of a new set of lenses through which we perceive and understand our reality, and new habits by which we lead our lives. Baha'u'llah describes himself as the divine physician with his fingers on the pulse of humanity. And he says that he has come to transform the whole world, to transform both our internal reality, which to my mind includes mindsets, and our external reality, which comes into being as a result of actions, behaviors, habits. So the two gifts that revelation bring, two of the greatest gifts, are new mindsets and new habits. In order to make any change, there are 3 steps. We have to recognize and accept where we are, have a vision of where we want to be, and then figure out what the steps are between where we are and where we're going to be. So let's look at a method for making changes. And remember, the topic is, how do we learn to elect fit, worthy leaders? Because it's one of the really bad habits we have, is that of electing very unworthy and unfit leaders who are not fit to do their job, in other words. Now, based on the writings of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, especially in this regard, and my own work in the area of life coaching, I've come up with something I call the alchemy of peace method, which is a 4-step process. And what it helps us to do is to take some of these key problems to say, how can we shift our mindsets and habits to create a more peaceful, just, and unified world? The 4 steps are, as you can see on the slide, first, to become aware of key outworn and harmful mindsets. The second is to identify the dysfunctional habits that flow from these old mindsets. The third is to mindfully choose new and empowering mindsets to replace the old ones. And the fourth is to intentionally and mindfully craft new habits to replace the dysfunctional ones. A good analogy is this. You know, when you have a bacterial infection, what do? The first thing the doctor does is give you antibiotics, right? So the antibiotics help us to kill and remove the old bacteria. That is steps 1 and 2. Get rid of the old mindsets, get rid of the old habits. Then we need to add probiotics, which are the good bacteria, into our system in order to create a strong immune system. And that is steps 3 and 4, introducing new mindsets and new habits into our collective lives and our individual lives. All right, let's look at the reality of our world when it comes to power and leadership. Where are we now? It's very obvious that trust in public institutions and leaders has plummeted to an all-time low. The Universal House of Justice commented on this also in its January 2019 letter, when they say the failings of so many organizations and institutions of society have understandably led to a decline in public trust. Unfortunately, the path we're on is unsustainable. We have limped along, rationalizing our behavior, justifying it, and expending vast amounts of energy trying to maintain equilibrium in an increasingly chaotic world. What we failed to do is to take responsibility and actually change it. And both Shoghi Effendi and the Universal House of Justice place the blame for this failure squarely at the feet of our leaders, into whose hands our destinies have been committed. The Guardian says it is their failure to adjust their systems, their economic and political institutions, to the imperative needs of a rapidly evolving age. And because of their failure to read or write the signs of the times and reshape their machinery of government to take into account the law of God, which is the law of the oneness of humanity. The Universal House of Justice, again in the 2019 letter, which is a really important letter that I would encourage you all to go back to and read as often as you can. They say that still the realization of our oneness will require a historic feat of statesmanship from the world's leaders. But they say, alas, this feat is still wanting. So we're still not there. And today we're going to try and see what we can do to push us to get there more quickly, because we can no longer afford to continue as before. The stakes are too high. The impact of the twin phenomena that we see on this slide of decline of trust in public institutions is going to lead to large numbers of human beings dying. As an example, we're seeing this with the pandemic. Failure to collaborate and cooperate to come up with a universal system of vaccine production and distribution that is equitable so that all the peoples of the world can get vaccinated means that many people are dying unnecessarily. And those who think that they're safe in the wealthier countries are going to have their own systems undermined because new variants of the virus are cropping up the longer we allow the virus to spread unchecked in other parts of the world. New variants come up and they will come back and undermine our vaccination system. Another impact of the pandemic is the economic devastation. They're already saying that we have it has cost humanity already $25 trillion, of which at least half is going to be borne by the wealthy countries. So this idea that the wealthy countries had that, oh, we'll just get our people vaccinated and then we'll be fine, we'll get back to economic life and we'll be safe, both are wrong. We won't be safe because of the variants, and economically, we're not going to be okay either because the damage and the cost is going to be so high. And there are other examples of this, of people dying. We're seeing this with climate change, failure of our leaders to come up with a proper universal system to determine what we can, how we can cut fossil fuel burning down to zero. We have 9 years left in which to keep the temperatures below the level at which we're going to have absolute catastrophe. We failed to do that. The Paris agreements only allow for voluntary pledges. And even if we were to stick to those voluntary pledges, they wouldn't be enough to save humanity. Okay. Now, using the alchemy of peace method, we are going to apply it and do something that I call the leadership shift, which is a tool. It is basically the application of the alchemy of peace to fix this problem of unfit leadership. So the first step, step one in the process, bring to the light of consciousness our old mindsets regarding what? The concept of power. Because the leaders we pick depend on how we think about power. Remember, we said habits are driven by mindset. So what is the mindset that we have as human beings around power? Well, there are three critical things we seem to believe. The first is that those in power seek to dominate and control us and to appropriate or grab our precious resources for their own selfish ends. The second thing we tend to believe is that those in authority are driven by ego and motivated by self-interest. The third thing we believe is that those in authority have a higher status than us, that somehow they're superior to the rest of us. These mindsets trigger particular emotional reactions. We tend to be very cynical as a result. Well, of course, if you believe those three things, then you're going to be very cynical about leaders and about elections. And we expect leaders to lie and be corrupt. And we feel helpless to change anything. So what do these mindsets lead to in terms of behavior? Now, this is interesting because we're starting to see what we actually do. What have we been doing so far? We're ambivalent about voting, and we actually prefer to sit most elections out. The result is we create a vacuum, which we allow other people to fill, and then we complain about the result because we don't like it, because other people made choices we don't like. We also set very low bars and standards for our leaders. We expect them to lie, to cheat, and steal. When we do vote, we tend to elect unfit and unworthy leaders who are incapable of meeting the needs of today. So many needs that the pandemic has made clear. We need equitable access to healthcare. We need education, shelter, safety, opportunity to work and make a meaningful contribution. They're also incapable of addressing the big challenges of today, like climate change, like the pandemic, like the nuclear threat, which still hangs over us. They're also unwilling to be truthful and transparent about the dangers we face, about the opportunities we have, and about the various courses of action that are open to us, and the consequences of our various decisions. We saw this with Brexit. You know, the British people at the time of the referendum were told by one side, oh, if you leave the European Union, we'll be able to save 350 million pounds a week that we have to otherwise pay to the EU. And that money will go to strengthening the National Health Service. Well, it turned out that was a lie. We weren't paying, the British were not paying 350 million pounds a week to the EU, and that money was not going to be reallocated to the National Health Service. And in fact, what they were not told was that a good fraction of the doctors and nurses in Britain come from continental Europe. And when Brexit happened, they had to leave and go back to their home countries. So the National Health Service not only didn't end up stronger, but it ended up being weaker. And these leaders are also incapable of creating unity of thought or a shared vision. And again, we see this with respect to climate change and the failure to set up a system to take the measures necessary to arrest it. And we see this with the pandemic. Finally, once these leaders are in power, we distrust them. And when we distrust leaders, it makes it even harder for them to unify us around a shared vision. So now we come to step 3. What is the new reality that we want to imagine? And what new mindset would be needed to create that new reality? So if the new reality is a fit leader who really has the interests of all the peoples of the world at heart, then we would need to start thinking about the concept of power in the following way. So what if we now shifted the way we think about power from the 3 items that we saw on one of the previous slides to this? So instead of thinking that leaders are egotistical and they're seeking power and dominance and that they're somehow better than us, we realize that power and authority are actually necessary elements of organizing society. And that the role of people in power is to create the necessary conditions to allow each of us to develop our potential. We also imagine if we started associating the word power with words such as release, encourage, channel, guide, and enable. These are all words mentioned by the Universal House of Justice again in a 2013 letter addressed to the Baha'is in Iran. Another responsibility of a leader is to create unity of thought and action. A famous American entrepreneur, Ken Blanchard, said, "The greatest leaders mobilize others by coalescing people around a shared vision." When you think about it, that's really the role the Universal House of Justice plays within the context of the covenant and the Baha'i community, right? They are the ones who set the vision for what we're aiming at, and then they create the plans to help us get from where we are, to bridge the gap between where we are to where we want to be. Abraham Lincoln also spoke of this. He said, "In this age, in this country," referring to the United States, "public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed." Abdu'l-Baha talks a lot about the necessity of having a unified public opinion. In The Secret of Divine Civilization, he said that the deficiencies in Iranian society when he was writing this work resulted from the total absence of such a unified public opinion. And then he says that the country, and by extension any country, cannot be properly administered until public opinion is rightly focused. This is really important. Now, the next way to conceive of power and the role of leaders is that leaders have the duty and indeed the privilege of serving. That's all they're doing. It's not about ego and self-interest and dominating and controlling. It's about service. The best way to understand this is to think about a waterfall. You know, for all the sound and fury of the water at the top of the waterfall when it's crashing on the rocks, the true power resides at the bottom, the reservoir, where the water accumulates. This is the station of humility and servitude, according to Abdu'l-Baha, who said that that was his station, right? The servant of the glory, the station of servitude. And that is the straight station of true power. So this is a radical shift in the conception of power. The other thing we have to recognize is that leaders are merely fulfilling a function for which they happen to be particularly well suited during a particular period of time. This is so important, and it's also important for us Baha'is when we are electing our own leadership even within the Baha'i community. It's not about ego, it's not about charisma, it's not about who's better spiritually. It has nothing to do with that. The question simply is, who has the capacities and capabilities to fulfill this particular duty and function in the best possible way during this period of time? And that way we don't become a test to people by building up their egos either. So it's very, very important. Another analogy to help us understand this is an army. Not everybody can be a general and not everybody can be a soldier. So we need both, and each have a very valuable and critical role to play. Another really important idea around power and authority is that leaders have to be able to take the long view, be proactive, and to address problems before they become emergencies. This is so important. COVID-19 has been a real lesson to us. You know, humanity was warned years ago that we were due for a pandemic that would be caused by an airborne virus that would travel from animals to human, and yet we failed to take action to prepare. There were calls to create a global virus surveillance network in order to study and prepare humanity, study this and prepare humanity for it, but nobody wanted to fund it. They said, oh, it costs too much. Turns out it would have cost a small amount of what we've now had to pay just to deal with the pandemic. And lastly, a really important way of thinking about power and the role of leaders is the ability to take people where they don't necessarily want to go, but where they ought to be. Rosalind Carter, the wife of former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, famously said this. She said, a great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. And Abdu'l-Baha talks about this when he talks again about how a leader should galvanize public opinion. So it's the job of the leader to rally public opinion and focus it. And he says public opinion must be directed to whatever is worthy of this day. And he says the only way to do it is through the use of adequate arguments and addressing clear, comprehensive, and conclusive proofs. And then he explains why, and we're seeing this with COVID. He says, for the helpless masses know nothing of the world. And while there is no doubt that they long for their own happiness, yet ignorance, like a heavy veil, shuts them away from it. I see this here in our own country, in the United States, this veil of ignorance. That is, again, the blame falls squarely at the feet of our leaders. So we have enough vaccines. We're fortunate. And yet the problem we have is because of inadequate messaging and rallying of people to understand the importance of getting the vaccine. We have vaccines, and yet we don't have enough people who are willing to take them. So we're going to be, in some sense, in as bad a position as the person who doesn't have access to the vaccine and really wishes to have it, because the end result is they're not taking the vaccine. And the result of that is the virus and the pandemic continue to spread. We see the importance of this quality with, again, climate change and a whole host of other issues that I'm not going to go into. So I propose that we adopt a new definition of leadership based on everything we've discussed. And this is my favorite definition from another American entrepreneur. These entrepreneurs actually have a great deal of wisdom. Jim Rohn says, to lead others is to help them change their thoughts, beliefs, and actions for the better. And when you think about what the Baha'i community is charged with doing, that's exactly all our core activities are aimed at ultimately helping people shift their thoughts, their beliefs, and actions for the better. Okay. If we adopt these new mindsets, we'll find that new habits will naturally flow from them. Because what will happen is we'll start to take responsibility for our future and demand that our leaders satisfy two particular criteria. The first habit, and the first prong, if you like, of the habit is our insistence that our leaders possess certain qualities of character. Let's look at what some of these qualities are. Now, all of these are taken, all of them except the three at the end, which I've extrapolated, but the others are all directly taken from writings of Abdu'l-Baha. So, and you know, Abdu'l-Baha talks, there's a lot, he spends a lot of time talking about the need for and how to elect fit and worthy leaders outside the context of the administrative order. In other words, he's talking about our societal institutions, our parliaments and our congresses and all the institutions that govern us. Okay, so this comes directly from Abdu'l-Baha. So the first key quality of character is honesty. Now, in this day and age, it's very easy to determine if a proposed leader is honest. With a click of a button on the internet, we can figure out what has their history been? How have they treated their spouses and family? And how have they treated their business partners? If they've cheated on their spouses, then why would I, whom they haven't even met, who is somebody who's going to vote for them, why should I expect this person who couldn't even be faithful to their spouse when they stood before God and said, I will be faithful to this one person? Why would I expect them to be faithful to the promises they make to me? It makes no sense to me. So that's one way. The other is to look at how they deal in business. Have they been known to be upright and have integrity, or have they cheated their business partners or embezzled funds? So again, if a person does that, why would I think that if I were to give them even more power and access to more money, that they would behave any better? The second quality is freedom from prejudice. We have to make sure that the person we're going to vote for does not have a habit of stoking the fires of prejudice, but rather has the habit and a record of being a unifier. The third is courage, courage to do the right thing, even if it's not popular. The former Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Jean-Claude Juncker, said during the global financial crisis in 2011, he says, we leaders in Europe know what to do. Our problem is we don't know how to get ourselves elected again once we do it. So again, it's this lack of courage to do the right thing just for the sake of doing the right thing. Freedom from corruption is so important. We see this all over the world. I don't think there's a single country that can say that there is no corruption in their system. And lately, just to give one example of hundreds, because a lot has been written about it, is Lebanon. So it suffered from decades of political corruption and poor government. And despite calls for reform by the IMF and the UN, which went unheeded, as a result of this, 55% of the people of that country are now in the category of poor. It is unbelievable, 55%. This is a country that used to be described as the Switzerland of the Middle East because of the quality of life that they had. And then we all heard about the huge explosion in 2020 in the port of Beirut that left 190 dead and large amounts of the capital in ruins. And yet, a butcher who was interviewed on the streets of Beirut lately said, you know, if there were elections tomorrow, the same people would be back. So that demonstrates our bad habit of electing leaders who are not fit. The next quality on this list is basic competence. You would think it's obvious that a leader has to have basic competence, but COVID-19 has demonstrated that it's one of the qualities that has been distinctly lacking in many of our leaders. And we see it also in their inability to tackle climate change, some really commonsensical things. For example, climate change has caused the melting of the glaciers and the ice in the Arctic Circle. As a result, the waterways are opening up. So what are we very bright countries doing, leaders of many countries? We're now starting to fight over those waters because we want, one of the reasons is because we want to have access to more oil and gas in those waters, the very things that led to the melting of the glaciers in the first place. We can't burn that oil and gas because we're supposed to be reducing our emissions to zero. So it just common sense is entirely lacking here. It just doesn't make any sense. The next quality is wisdom and justice. These twin qualities are described by Abdu'l-Baha as two mighty banners that if a leader or a king has them, they will cause the influence of that government to quickly and easily penetrate the whole earth as though it were the light of the sun. Then we come to compassion and empathy. These are really important qualities, and they've been demonstrated to be so during COVID. In fact, what's been fascinating during COVID is we've discovered that women leaders are particularly strong in having these qualities. And it's no longer just, oh, isn't it nice that she's compassionate and empathic? They're absolutely critical in order to keep the people of their country safe. We saw this with the leader of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, who is lauded universally and within her own country for having the qualities of humility and compassion and empathy and the willingness and ability to listen to the people. As a result, New Zealand has beat the virus and is doing very well on so many other fronts as well. I added 3 other qualities at the end. Leaders must seek means to achieving their ends that are as worthy as the ends themselves. I'm not going to get into this in detail. I could spend a whole nother talk on this, and later I'll tell you where you can access this information if you're interested. But I wanted to have marked it for you. They also need to have the habit of seeking the broadest diversity of input possible, because all the studies now show that the more diversity you have in decision making, even in business, the faster you make decisions and the better the decisions are. And even in business, the better your financial gains are. So, I mean, it's just a win-win situation. And the leaders must also evince an attitude of transparency and take us into their confidence. Now, I wanted to sound a note of caution. Can you unmute yourselves, please? Okay. When we look at the importance of these qualities, it's important that we understand something. Our tendency as human beings when we're going to elect someone is to look at their policies. Oh, what do they say they're going to do? What are the promises they're making? I suggest, and this is my personal understanding of how the Baha'i system works and what the Baha'i writings, including Abdu'l-Baha, advocate, that we first focus on electing people who have the necessary characteristics that we've just discussed. Why is this important? Because once you elect someone who has the skills, the competence, and has a good conscience and has integrity and honesty and all the qualities and is willing to consult, then you can let them go and trust them to make good decisions. The reason it's important to do this is because we have to allow our leaders the opportunity to be flexible and agile and to adapt to the realities before them. The truth is that a leader can make promises about what she or he will do once they're in power. But once they're in power, reality kicks in. And it could be that a whole bunch of new things have come up that nobody thought of that end up being the things they actually have to deal with, and they can't follow through on their promises. Abraham Lincoln famously said, and he was a really good president, he said, "I never had a policy. I've just tried my best to do my best each and every day." And Harold Macmillan, a former British prime minister, when asked what was likely to throw any government off course, said, "Events, dear boy, events." Now, a living example for us today during COVID was the election of Boris Johnson as prime minister. So you remember that he ran on the promise to get Brexit done. That's why people voted for him. They just wanted to get Brexit done. Nobody could have predicted, not the people and not poor Mr. Johnson himself, that once he was elected, the main issues he would have to deal with were a global pandemic. And remember, he himself got COVID, and his pregnant wife, got COVID. And he would have to deal with the worst economic recession his country had faced since the Great Depression. And he would have to be accountable for his country's history of racism and colonialism. Those were things he had not anticipated having to be his 3 top priorities. And then there was Brexit. But you see now why it's so important to elect people, to elect leaders who actually have all the qualities that, regardless of what they're faced with in the moment, they're likely to make sound decisions, and they grow and evolve just like Abraham Lincoln did. His own thinking about slavery evolved from the time he was first elected to the time he emancipated the slaves of the United States. But he had the qualities, he had the capacity to achieve that growth while he was president. The second criteria, a prong of the new habit, is to examine the motivation of prospective leaders. In other words, ask ourselves a simple question. Is this person interested in money, status, influence, and power? Or do they desire to work for the collective good of all nations in the world? Now, this is important. This is, again, something, a radically new idea that we see in the Baha'i writings. And this comes directly from Baha'u'llah himself, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. In Gleanings, he, addressing the representatives of people in every land, says, O ye the elected representatives of the people in every land, take ye counsel together, and let your concern be only for that which profiteth mankind, not your own country, but mankind, and bettereth the condition thereof, if ye be of them that scan heedfully. So Baha'u'llah is calling on members of our parliaments, when they go to consult, to not just take their national interest into account, but the interests of the world. Look at how far-thinking Baha'u'llah was, that in today's interconnected and interdependent world, where we make decisions, say, about fuels to burn, about technologies, or whether we use electric cars or diesel cars, these decisions don't just impact our country, they impact the whole world. So we have to take into account the good of the world. Or vaccine production and distribution, or whether we mask or not. It affects not just our neighbors and people in our country, but when people come as tourists and travel and go back, they're going to carry the variants with them. So our behavior affects all of us. All right, I'm getting close to the end. There is a really important tool to determine whether these two criteria that form the habit that we're looking for, the new habit, the two criteria of the qualities that we demand in leaders and their motivations that we examine. How do we determine these? For this, we need a tool, and that's investigation, unfettered and free investigation of a prospective leader's record of service. In order to do this, there's an essential skill we need to hone, and that is the independent and unbiased investigation of truth. For those of us who are Baha'is, we're all very familiar with this passage from the Hidden Words of Baha'u'llah, in which we are told to see with our own eyes and not through the eyes of others, because this is the essence of justice. It's really, really fundamental. So when we come to elect our leaders, we have to make sure that we don't listen to what anyone else is saying, do our own investigation, learn to assess information without preconceived prejudices, don't allow ourselves to be infantilized, in other words, treated like infants, learn to think for ourselves rather than being drowned by other people's opinions. We have to detach ourselves from strong emotions, likes and dislikes, and distinguish between empirical information and opinions. And finally, we have to avoid the pitfall of believing that truth lies somewhere in the middle of two opposing views. That's just not true. Truth is truth, and sometimes it may lie closer to one end or closer to the other. It's not in the middle of two opposite opinions. So these are skills that we all have to hone. I want to end with this quote from Abdu'l-Baha. It is in Tablets of Abdu'l-Baha, and in which this was a letter he wrote to the American Baha'is in response to their New Year's greeting to him in 1906. And he says that he wishes this blessing for them, that they may make the world a new world, that old ideas may depart and new thoughts come. So this is the shift in mindsets. That ancient politics, whose foundation is war, be discarded, and modern politics, founded on peace, raise the standard of victory. So this is going to depend on our habits, one of which is electing fit leaders. So I have addressed one set of mindset, our mindset around concept of power, and the shift in habit, which is electing new leaders. There are 5 other really important mindsets and habits that we need to shift, I believe, based on my personal understanding of the Baha'i writings, if we are to create a world that is peaceful, just, and unified. If you're interested in knowing what these other 5 mindset shifts are, including the material that you've seen here, I put out a book this year, The Alchemy of Peace, and I wanted to just share it with you. It's available on Amazon.com, anywhere you are in the world. Here is a picture of the cover. And please let your friends know I wrote this for people who really are not Baha'is but are interested in learning what we can practically do to make this world a different and better world. And the last slide is, if you're interested, I invite you also. I have every second and fourth Saturday of each month at 4 p.m. Eastern time. I go live on Facebook, on my Facebook channel, and also on YouTube, the CPGG YouTube channel. And the program's called Reimagining Our World. And we have a 20-minute sharing of reflections and comments and some interactions. So you're very welcome to join and invite your friends as well. I think that's it. So I think, Fernando, that we can stop sharing the slides and move to questions.
Thank you so much, Sovaida. I think I stopped sharing my video. Thank you so much. This was so rich and clear for me. It was really a pleasure listening to you. And if you allow me, I'll start the questions because I'm very curious. I have one question in my mind. Is that you mentioned all these qualities in a leader that we want to see in power. But as Baha'is, we have to learn how to navigate this very divided political scenario that we have right now. How can I vote for someone that reflects these qualities that you mentioned without taking a side or contributing to division that we see right now?
So I must admit, I'm a little puzzled by your question, because the whole point in this approach is that it takes us out of the political divide. So usually what polarizes, and you can help me clarify, but the way I think about it is what usually contributes to polarization and political division is different ideologies and political stances and policies that contradict each other. By taking this approach, you're saying, you know what? Forget ideology, forget whether it's Democratic Party or Republican Party. Well, first of all, as Baha'is, we know we can't join political parties, right? We can't affiliate ourselves. So thank God, that release number one. Second thing is, now I need to elect somebody. Who do I vote for? And based on my understanding of the writings, the most important thing to look at is the qualities of that person, character. That transcends politics. It literally is, what kind of human being is this? What is this person's qualities of spirit? When this person goes to the next world, their body won't be there, but they will be known by these qualities. What are their qualities? And we also know that we don't discuss, in order to not create division, we don't discuss this with other people. So it's impossible to create polarization if you're not having conversations with your neighbors and friends about, oh, I think you should vote for so-and-so because she has such amazing qualities, versus the other person who doesn't. This is an intensely personal endeavor that we conduct prayerfully, with mind, and through analysis based on their record of service and how they've shown up in life before. So I think this actually completely bypasses all the polarization problems.
Thank you so much, Sovaida. I see Gordon has questions, and Karine also. I'll try to manage this Q&A. So we'll start with Gordon. You can go ahead, Gordon, unmute yourself and ask directly to Sovaida.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. However, I think you're preaching to the choir. However, reframing our concept of power and leadership. Yes, and changing our mindset. And I agree, you know, reality is the way we see it, and we all see it differently. And we as Baha'is, of course, we have the fortunate thing of having a center and a covenant, and we all have a collective unity, which the world does not have. And until the world has a collective goal, I don't think we'll go very far. And as you said, climate change and COVID are good examples. Despite the evidence and despite the facts and the crisis, we still cannot agree on how to handle these crises and what protective measures and restrictions and rules should be taken. So it's a tough call, a tough thing. The other thing I wanted to say, you said trust is at an all-time low, and partly I think in myself is because you need a trustworthy system. There's so much corruption in every country that people lack trust. And most unfortunately, they don't trust science. And we have this rampant conspiracy theories that people believe in and accept, and this is extremely disruptive. However, I do think your current American president reflects many of those good qualities that you had there on the list. Anyway, now to my question. You had these 4 steps of the alchemy of peace, which basically I think can be summed up in the Baha'i daily goal is to bring ourselves to account each day. And so how do we become aware of our key harmful mindsets and identify our dysfunctional habits and etc. This is not very easy for an individual to do, given our own biases and our belief systems. You know, we see ourselves. Of course, we want to think we're doing okay and we're doing our best, and we think we're pretty good, and we have a certain immunity to change. And we as Baha'is are a minority, I think, of the world population who is interested in being and changing and being better. So I think we have to try to engage in the public conversation to raise the consciousness of the unity of mankind and to help make the world more just in that way. Okay, well, it's a very complex subject. I can go on and on, but thank you. That's my comment and question.
I just heard a very small question. I don't want to take up too much time. How do we change our mindset? So yeah, it's kind of a cop-out to say it's hard. Yes, it's hard. And we are so fortunate that the writings provide us with some really key pointers. And what I've tried to do is highlight what I see in the writings, pointing to us, here are some key mindsets you need to change. Here are the new ones you need to replace them with. Here's some key habits you need to change. And here's the new ones you need to replace them with. So we don't actually have to struggle that hard ourselves. And if we could start with what the writings actually point to us, shine the light so brightly on, and share it with our friends who are not Baha'is, who don't have access to the Baha'i writings. You know, there's so much guidance in the faith beyond, though, let's just talk about unity and justice and peace. Those are very big, wonderful concepts, and they're the ultimate goal. But there are a million steps between here and there. And what do we do day to day to get us to that kind of world? And this is an attempt really to break things into, here's some steps we can start taking now as Baha'is and sharing with our other friends that everybody can start taking. So.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Sovaida, again. Next on the line, it's Chris. I'll just kindly ask you guys to be brief in your questions so everyone can ask their questions, okay?
Hello. So you were mentioning about the investigation of truth, and you were speaking today and 3 years ago in Baha'i summer school about the rotten, let's say, rotten government and politics. This makes me to think, and this is quite sensitive subject, I think, for the society, and especially for me, the last year has been really tough. Why the medicine and science is not corrupt, and why we shouldn't seek the truth, the independent investigation of truth as well in those two areas. Yeah, this has been really, really, how to say, not really nice time, and I really have prayed a lot to have answers, to know what should I do, or what I should do as a Baha'i about science, about medicine, because we know that it is not pure. If the government and politics are not pure, how can it be this pure? And what parts, or which part of, as a Baha'i, I should follow? And those conspiracy theories are really interesting. Of course, we shouldn't follow anything emotionally, but it makes us think. I don't know. It has been really, really difficult here. And I really want to follow Baha'u'llah. I really want to follow Baha'i teachings, harmony between science and religion. And I can't believe still that science and medicine is pure, and it's completely, yeah, thinking that, you see.
I feel you and I hear you. And first, let me say I'm giving you a big hug, because I can see the purity of your intention and your desire to do the right thing, right? And that is the most important thing. So, sister, you're on the right path. So, you know, the Universal House of Justice has been asked this question. And if you haven't seen the letter, I would urge you to look at it.
I have.
You have.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so yes, investigation of truth applies also to in all areas, including to science and medicine. So I mean, as far as I can see in the faith, this is a principle, an approach we take to everything. Look, if we apply it to deciding if Baha'u'llah is who he says he is, and he is we believe the mouthpiece of God, then nobody and nothing else is exempt. So then the question becomes, how do I decide in an imperfect world where anything is likely to be tainted? And really, we live in an imperfect world and no decision is going to be perfect. So first we have to detach ourselves from the idea that I'm going to make a perfect decision. We're not perfect, the world is not perfect, and no decision is perfect. All we can do in any given situation is do our best given what we know at any given time. Even the religious truth, the writings tell us, is not absolute, but relative to our capacity to understand. So that's where I start. I'm just sharing with you my own process, and I hope it'll be helpful to you. Then I'll go to what else the guidance is from the writings. Baha'u'llah tells us to look at what reliable sources say. So if we don't know who exactly is a reliable source, and the Universal House of Justice has acknowledged that this is a problem in today's world, that there is so much misinformation that it's hard, unfortunately, sometimes to discern reliable sources. But the good news, and this is what I found helpful, is that you then go for a majority. So what I did, I'm just going to give the example of a vaccine, right? To take or not to take the vaccine in Sovaida's world. So I talked to more than one doctor. I talked to 3 different doctors whom I trusted because I knew they were good people and wanted to do the best for society. I also talked to my naturopath and to my homeopath. And it turned out that all 5 of them said, absolutely, given who you are and what your particular medical history, there's absolutely no doubt you have to take the vaccine. So the House of Justice in their letter also says, quoting from Shohi Effendi, who had written to a believer who said, what do I do if one of my doctors says, do this, and the other doctor says, don't do this? He said, get a third opinion and then go with the majority. See, so we make the best of what we have. So the other thing that Christina has given me a lot of heart during this pandemic, particularly when it comes to science, is I see that the scientists, this is again Sovaida's personal belief, I don't mean to impose it on you or anyone, but just sharing with you what goes on in my head. The scientists have been at the forefront of demonstrating all the things that Baha'u'llah's teachings tell us, the need to collaborate, to cooperate, to treat humanity as though it were a single body. So what do I mean? Until the pandemic, the way scientists got their information out was by publishing papers. So they would compete with each other, everything was very secret, and then they would wait to publish in a reputable journal so that they could get all the glory and get a prize or whatever, get the credit. Most of the scientists around the world put that aside during COVID because they realized they could not spend 10 to 12 years to create a vaccine, which was the normal time, 10 to 14 years, because too many people would die. And so they stopped waiting. As soon as they found information, they started sharing it around the world. So you had thousands of scientists from all countries in the world. They're not government scientists. These are scientists working privately. And they're all collaborating with each other. And the beauty of it was, as soon as, and I've done a lot of reading on this, because I find it fascinating. The beauty of this is that as soon as misinformation would come, because it was exposed to thousands of scientists all around the world, not just one government giving, information out in a very controlled way, they would expose the misinformation very quickly. And they would do this on public forum. They were using Slack and they were using Twitter to do the analysis. I think it's the most amazing thing. And it was because of this kind of collaboration, intense, global, not controlled by any one government, but involving scientists from around the world, that they were able to come up with a vaccine in 11 months. And not one vaccine, several vaccines in 11 months. That's a miracle. Imagine we could solve the climate change problem if we took the same approach, right? So that gives me more heart also, that in fact, the one area where there's a lot less corruption, it seems from Ed, and I've done my own due diligence for me, a lot less corruption and misinformation is exactly in science. Now, what happens is when politicians get hold of that and they have their own agendas, then they distort what the scientists are saying. But for me, I've stopped listening to what the politicians say, and I just look at what the scientists are telling me. And if you've got thousands around the world saying something, then I'm good. And I've consulted with my own doctors, and all 5 of them are telling me something. And the last thing the House of Justice says is it's also, you have to think about social responsibility to other people. So it's not just about what do I want to do, but am I putting other people at risk by doing or not doing something? So those are my thoughts. And I don't know that you were asking about the vaccine. I just chose to give it as an example, but it applies to whatever area of science you're looking at, including climate change, right?
Thank you, Sovaida. Again, next is, just a second, I have a list here. Marian, can you go ahead and unmute yourself, Marian? Are you still with us? I cannot see you.
Actually, we know.
You're muted, Mariam.
Yeah. I think we can hear you now.
We know most of politicians are corrupt, even they are from right, left, or whatever. So what should we do? If we don't find the qualities in any of those, shouldn't we vote?
That's a really good question. So look, ultimately, I go back to the point I made with respect to the previous question. There's no such thing as perfection, right? So the qualities that we laid out were the ideal. So it's important to know what you're aiming for. There was a poem that we used to say when I was a kid that says, when I was young as urchins are and full of fairy lore, I aimed an arrow at a star and hit the barnyard door. And then it goes on to say, I've shot at heaps of stars since then. And thank God I'm shooting at stars, because if I were to aim at the barnyard, then my arrows would probably fall in the dust. So we aim high, and we're going to get something far from high, but better than where we are now. So we now have a sense. So it's a question of relativity. If you have 4 candidates to choose between, and 3 of them are awfully corrupt, and one is doing considerably better than the others, then maybe you vote for them, or maybe you sit it out. The trouble with sitting anything out is you create a vacuum, and you're then handing your vote to somebody else to fill that vacuum and maybe choose the most corrupt of the 4. So I take my own civic duties very seriously, and I realize we live in an imperfect world, and I try to do the best given what we have. But the main goal here is really to use this material to raise consciousness with other people. And it's going to take time, but we need to start getting other people to focus on the importance of these qualities, because the time will come then that we will demand, and we're going to have to demand system changes. As the gentleman before said, our systems are corrupt, and they need to be reformed in many different ways. And my hope is the young generation are getting less and less patient with all this BS that we have in the world, and they're no longer willing to just sit by and put up with it. So for now, maybe you pick the best of a bad lot. Maybe you just choose to sit it out, but whatever you do, start talking to your friends and colleagues about the importance. And you can say, boy, it's so frustrating. I'm having a hard time, deciding whom to elect, because I wish these are the qualities we deserve to have in our leaders. And what can we do to get there? And that way you start a conversation.
We're a little bit over our time, but I'll allow you, Karine and Sandra, to ask your questions. Sovaida, if you don't mind, as we're a little bit late to start.
That's partly my fault, sorry.
No, it's okay. Karine, if you...
I pass. My question was asked by Miriam, so you can go to Sandra.
Perfect. Sandra?
Aloha, everyone. So Virginia, first off, thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. It's very, very important for us to actually dive into these matters and be very conscious of them and know front to back to front what to do. My question was partially answered before. I just want to see, just in case that I can't remember of anything, what else as voters can we do? Because the mindset, changing a mindset of ourselves and others that we know, whom we know, takes a lot of time and effort. But do you think that there is anything when we're close to elections that we can actually do in order to maybe be able to influence our friends and our loved ones to make better decisions?
That's a really great question. So one of the things that I do I'm trying to think with the people as we get closer to elections, it's kind of like, oh boy, that time's coming up again. And I share with them that after having given it a lot of deep thought over many years, I've concluded that we're likely to come up with the leaders who are best equipped to deal with our current challenges if we focus first on their qualities of character. And I share with them all the quotes from Abraham Lincoln and from Harold Macmillan. And I give them, you know, I would give them the example of Boris Johnson, like this poor guy, you know, he didn't think he was going to have to deal with these 3 crises. He thought he was going to deal with Brexit. And so we need to have somebody in place who's willing to, regardless what the curveball is that's thrown at them, that they're equipped because they have the tools of character, the ability to consult with others, the humility to consult with others, the humility to listen, the willingness to take diverse viewpoints into account, somebody who's not prejudiced and doesn't have blinders on. That's what I would do. I would literally start saying, these are some of the qualities, and this is without reference to individuals, right? I wouldn't say, oh, I think this person has it and this person doesn't. You're laying the groundwork by saying, this is the process that I'm finding myself going through, because I have concluded that ultimately that is the only way that we're likely to get fit leaders whom we deserve and who can take us to where we need to go. And who are courageous and who are not out for their own ego, you know, you just share it with them. And then you can have a conversation, but also be very clear that as a Baha'i, I am not going to start debating personalities and parties, and because I don't belong to a political party, but I care about my country and I want to elect somebody who's really going to have the collective interests of my country. And then you can say, you know, in my faith, we're told that our national leaders, when they deliberate, should have the interests of all of humanity in mind. And that is something I look for. Wow, wouldn't that be an eye-opener? And they say, huh? What? So.
Thank you, Sovaida.
Thank you so much, Sovaida. I think this was such a great talk. For me, it was so enlightening to see really the Baha'i codes you chose and how the letters of the house you chose also to portray and frame the topic today. And I really hope that I get some of my friends to watch this talk. And on this, I'm gonna share with you guys where the recordings of the Baha'i school are. There is a tab on our website, bahaischoolportugal.eu. You can also translate the website to English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And there's a tab here called recordings. This is where the recording of these talks is going to be, and where you can find the previous talks as well, okay? And I hope Sovaida can share these slides with me today. I already have it actually, so I can, if you allow me, I'll just put it here on the website, Sovaida.
Wonderful. Perfect.
And just a quick reminder for you guys, let me see here. Our next talk in Portuguese, it's on the 27th of June. And our next talk in English is on July 11th. Okay, so I really hope to see you all there in July or by the end of this month in June. Thank you so much again, Sovaida. I'm gonna go ahead and let people thank you, because I saw some good reactions in the chat. You can unmute yourself and just thank Sovaida yourself. So thank you so much, Sovaida.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all your patience.
Muito obrigado. Pessoal, se quiserem dizer obrigado a Sovaida, podem dizer à vontade. E eu vou parar o recording.
Obrigada a todos. Foi excelente.